and we're passing them on the way down. Now, I'm trying to think of what hymn we're going to sing to him. And you know what I'm thinking? It's na 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 na. Hey, yeah, I'm not going to sing the rest of it, but hey, goodbye. Because we're going up, he's coming down. Now, the point of this is where the Antichrist gets all of his power. And he comes in Revelation chapter 12. Here's that war that takes place in heaven. Notice what the Bible says, Revelation 12. Then the war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels also fought, but he could not prevail. And there was no place for them in the heavens any longer. So the great dragon was thrown out, the ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the one who deceives the whole world. He was thrown to the earth, and his angels with him. Then you pick up in Revelation 13, and this is the whole point. And it talks about, this beast coming up out of the sea, and the word sea there is talking about humanity. There's those 10 horns that we've been talking about. That's those 10 nations. This guy rises up out of nowhere, out of that 10-nation confederacy, and there's something else that happens, I believe, that he captures the world's attention. And I believe these verses talk about it. Look at some of these verses. It describes him. And these are the same words that were used to describe, remember, those other empowers we talked about? He's going to have it all. The Bible says here, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast I saw was like a leopard. Remember, we talked about this. His feet were like a bear. His mouth was like a lion's mouth. The dragon gave him power, his throne and great authority. Now, here's the key. One of his heads appeared to be fatally wounded, but his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed the beast. I believe there are going to be 2 things that are going to capture the world's attention that will make him the Antichrist. First of all, he's going to be able to sign a peace treaty with Israel and the Palestinians, which will be, woo, everybody will say, man, where did this guy come from? And he's going to be so smooth. But then he's going to be able to do something that nobody else has ever done outside of Jesus, it looks like. It looks like he dies. And either he literally dies or he does a David Copperfield imitation. But probably he really dies. And he is brought back to life. Now remember, you stop and think about it. When I was growing up, I said, well, how would the rest of the world know that? I mean, what if that happened 30 years ago? 30 years ago, there was no Fox and no CNN and, no cable network. Today, folks, if that was to happen, everybody in every part of the world would see this. And think about it. Here's a guy that he looks like he's been fatally wounded, and he comes back to life. And, of course, who is he imitating? He's imitating Jesus. And that's what Satan has always done. He's always imitated Christ. And so in Revelation 13, it talks about, the beast, this fatal wound has been healed in chapter 13, verses 12 through 14. And down in verse 14, it says, the sword that wound that yet lived. I mean, he was killed. Now, some people believe he's talking about the revived Roman Empire. But it's very specific to me as we keep reading these verses. It's talking about a brutal wound by a sword. Somebody dies. And then in Revelation 7, verse 8, it talks about the same thing. It says, the beast that you saw was and then was not. He was alive, but then he died. And then in Revelation 17, verse 11, it says, the beast that was not is himself the 8th, and yet is the 7th, and goes to destruction. This is the Antichrist. He comes on the scene. Now let's talk in a practical way today, because we're living in the day and we're trying to say, well, how would all this go down? Folks, and if you've read anything about the Antichrist, he will take control of the world. And never before until today could he do what he has the ability to do. Today we know, because of the banking system that we have, because of the electronic technology that's available today, it will be very easy for the one-man ruler to take over the banking system, take over everything we know in this world. He will have the ability to do that. Today, billions of dollars are transferred by lying. We have credit cards today. The day will come, and we've all heard about the mark, and remember the chip that we saw in the video. We are now living in that day. I read this week there's a thing that's called the RFID. It's called the Radio Frequency Identification. Today, it's already here. Some companies are using it to put on their products so that people can't steal it. If you have a pet today, they will insert this chip in your pet so that your pet will never get lost. Today, this technology is being used for people who have Alzheimer's. They implant this chip into their body so that if they wander away, they can find. I just want you to know we are there. 30 years ago, this would have never happened. Could have never happened. But today, it could happen. It could happen right now. Your mortgage, your car insurance, everything that you buy would have to be regulated through him. And if you're not willing to do that, then you die. You die. Because you can't go to the grocery store and you can't buy your groceries, and you can't go to the doctor without the identification number. So what does that mean? In the end, there will be a point where he will control 2/3 of the world's government. And I'll explain the next third next week. He'll just control all the oil, most of the money, all the governments, 2/3 of the world. It's just hard but it will happen. The Bible also teaches that there will be a one world economy. He'll be able to cut off, sanction, whatever you want to call it. He will control the food supply in the world. And there will be a one world religion. He's going to join up with a guy that the Bible calls the false prophet. And he's going to do exactly what Hitler did. At the beginning, he's going to use religion, join with these evil forces to get what he wants to accomplish in this masterful plan to control the world. So where does that leave us today if we're believers? Well, we know that if we're Christians, we're out of here, right? Remember, we're not here. And next week, you're going to know why you don't want to be here. But stop and think about this. What would this sermon mean to us today? You say, well, wow. I'll be up there and they'll be down here. That's the point. You know what? When I prepare a sermon like this, it brings real conviction to my heart, because I know that means there's probably family members and friends, people that I know that if the rapture occurs, they're not going. And they're going to be left behind to live with this guy. So as a believer, I have a responsibility, I have an obligation to share Jesus in the last hours, the last days that he's given us. Folks, that's what we're supposed to be doing as a church. That should be like at the top of the list. But the second thing we need to understand, that if you're here today and maybe you're not a Christian, and maybe you come to this church and you've heard this stuff and you're saying, man, Pastor, this stuff is just so heavy. You know, that's why we had Brian Regan. We tried to lighten it up a little bit. It's just so heavy. I'm not sure about this God and Antichrist and, you know, these 10 world governments. And it's just, you know what? We understand, because we used to be on the same side of the fence till we became believers. We were kind of like that too. We had more questions than answers. But today, as we close the service, I just want to specifically talk to those of you that may be here and you're not yet believers. What will happen to you if everything that I said today becomes true? What will happen? You will live in the day of the Antichrist. He will rule the world with an iron fist. You will live in the day of greatest destruction that we're going to talk about next week, which is Armageddon. And when you hear what's going to happen next week, there is no way in this world I would ever even want to think about being wrong about that answer. So today, as we close today, you know, this can be information, but for me, I hope there's a lot of application, and that is this, that we'll be serious about what God's called us to do as believers. Number two, if you're here today and you're not sure of your relationship with God, I don't think I'd want to take a chance on it, because it gets worse. And we'll find out next week.